Hi everybody. I wanted to do a quick little video out here today, and I wanted to kind of call it the what ifs of the Miami Valley. And the what ifs would have been if they would have actually done the actual 675 loop around the Miami Valley and actually completed it instead of just doing these, the southeast corner where it just connects 70 to 75 from you know south of Miamisburg to the just outside of up there by Eden and everything, and goes through Fairborn. And when I looked at the pictures on everything with how it would have actually kind of planned out, I'll post a picture of it. It would have actually ran through, obviously Miamisburg, going up around, Germantown, kind of coming up, through Old Town, Trotwood, obviously, and all that type of stuff. And then kind of, honestly, probably would have taken over either Union Road or Polk Road, and then connecting back up to 70 through there. And I always think about like how even just going that direction, and if they would have just did that connection, and what it would have looked like, and the economic, you know, ramifications of that whole area would have been like, especially for Germantown, or especially for, you know, not necessarily Brookville and Clayton and all that, because now you see what the area looks like now, and how it has grown, and especially with Brookville. And but then I also try to think about like what, if they could have actually done it back in the 70s and through the 80s, if they would have ran, you know 675 going up around Phillipsburg on the backside of West Milton, and then going up towards Pleasant Hill and all that. What would those areas would have been like, coming up through the 80s and 90s, if they would have actually completed 675. You think about that area now and how it looks. you know it's all farmland. Really, it wasn't until recently being developed. A lot of people have been kind of moving out, north of West Milton, some of the subdivisions, and maybe even like out towards Pleasant Hill, and not. I mean, there still is a lot of farmland out there. It's kind of a small community, but could you imagine what 675 would have done for that area, especially for development? And then obviously coming back around, connecting it up towards, the north side of Troy, which is obviously now where the hospital's at, and where kind of up there by Fox Drive and everything. And what more development would have been on the south side of Piqua down there before, the 90s and 2000s and stuff like that. But that's always kind of the thought process that always kind of goes into my mind, especially. If you think about the next connection, that would have been, able to cut through on the top side of Troy, where all those new homes are at now, going along 25A, and then kind of cutting out there by Casstown, and a little bit out there going on top of 235, and cutting around the north side of New Carlisle, coming back down. Interesting. I always think about that, and the what ifs of what the Miami Valley would have been like if it would have been built. Kind of rambling on here, but the pros of it, obviously, first and foremost, economic development, just everywhere. Pleasant Hill probably would be a different place now. Casstown area would be a different area now. New Carlisle would have definitely been a different area, especially with more, probably even more stores and grocery stores and everything else out in those areas. And then you think about, even up along there around the around Trotwood and all that, how much that would have changed in the 90s, especially for the Salem Mall area out on 49 down there, and what could have been, and how that would have changed, and would the Salem Mall still have survived? Time will always tell on that one. I know they're finally starting to revitalize that whole area now. But then you start thinking about, what Germantown would have been like, you know, would have been more houses around that whole area now, and the development out that way along Route 4. And maybe you are one of those people that were around in the '70s that saw the development of 675 and along that whole corridor, and what it was like as it was getting completed, because we saw what happened in the '90s once it was pretty much finished up in '80s. I think it was '87, and essentially what started to come about, especially with the Fairfield Commons Mall in the '90s. And I think I have to look up the exact day, their exact year when the Nutter Center was, and that whole area was developed for Wright State and all that, and obviously all the stuff around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But then you think about the green getting built up in the early 2000s, and all that whole area was going to be the whole area around Indian Ripple. And then you keep going down the line, Wilmington Pike recently with Cornerstone, and that whole, I almost going to say that people in Bellbrook and that whole area probably hate it now because of all the traffic and all of the developments and stuff like that. But especially with Costco and Cabela's over there, and then obviously you keep going down the line down there to Centerville and 48. Especially in between Whip Road and Alex Bell and all that stuff around Centerville. All the shops that were built along that area. Now all the new apartments going up and stuff like that. You just keep going down that whole line, and just the retail that was brought in, and some of the businesses that were brought in, and all the different things, especially down there by the Dayton Mall, down there by Sam's Club. So, I mean, obviously always the pros will always be that. And also, like I said, I think about if they were to, I don't know if they still have time to do, if they even thought about doing it. Let's just say they actually made the connection going up around the backside of New Carlisle through, I think that's considered Donaldsville, and then connecting it over 235 on, kind of cutting through, Casstown and up that direction and along 25A. Could they do it today, especially with a lot more of that area being farmland and being able to be bought? Probably. They probably could have. They probably could, honestly. But again, it's you got all these different ways of getting around that whole area. Would it be a thing where it'd be worthwhile? Maybe not. But again, it would definitely, the pros of it, honestly, you'd be able to alleviate a lot of the traffic congestion going through downtown Dayton, and maybe not now. You wouldn't see a lot of extra development up there, but you might, especially on the north side of New Carlisle. But a lot of people probably wouldn't be happy out there in Casstown and the north side of Troy and stuff like that, on I think it's that Stony Bridge out there. And when you have 41 going out that way, yeah, he would definitely tick off a lot of people out there. But I could see if that would have been developed, even if that was developed back in the like I said, back in the 70s and 80s, just doing half of the 675 loop, connecting 75 on both sides, man, that would have been a game changer for the Miami Valley and just in general. So, kind of share your thoughts on what, especially if you live in those areas, that would have been, especially I showed the map and everything. Maybe you were around when 675 was being developed back in the 70s, in late 60s, early 70s, and finally getting completed in the 80s. And then what it was like when that was getting started, and maybe you were one of the people that were affected when they decided to buy your land up to build it. Share your thoughts. And then also maybe if you were, maybe if you're still around in you know, you're one of the ones that were against building 675 around the whole Miami Valley. You know, maybe share your thoughts on what the government brought to your feet on you know price wise on purchasing part of your land and everything. So I always like to hear like people's thoughts on that type of stuff, like how things would have ran or been different around the Miami Valley, what things would have changed, and how things would have changed. Either. Hi everybody. I actually had to finish this video up at my house on my computer because the unfortunately my cell phone kind of overheated yesterday while I was on the boat. But I wanted to kind of use some of the pictures that I have found over the time here and kind of point them out to you. And if you look at it here now, you actually have the original plans for 675 and how it would have basically ran about through and up through 35 and going through Riverside, kind of now where the Air Force Museum is, and also you know essentially kind of following up through Woodman and up through Harshman, and now you can kind of see where you know basically Huber Heights, the south end of Huber Heights, and a little bit over there by where Webster Street and all that stuff would have been. That would have definitely changed up that whole area. You probably wouldn't have had a lot of that housing development, especially down there off of where the Forest Ridge area is now and Union Schoolhouse. That would have been, never developed, in the 70s when all those houses were being developed. But it's kind of crazy to think about, back in the 60s and stuff like that, where, you know, especially with these projects that were, brought about to develop, how it was affected, today, especially, how Huber Heights would have gone about. But, we just keep thinking about it. But this definitely would have been a complete. I don't. This would have never worked. I don't think it would have worked, especially with 675 coming in right below where Interstate 70 is now and all that type of stuff. But yeah, share your thoughts on that one. That would have been, especially if you were living in Huber Heights back in the late 60s and early 70s. But or even what is it? Well, I think it was called Bethel Township or whatever it was. But uh, we'll keep moving on here. And the other picture that I wanted to kind of show you in this video was the development of what actually kind of come out was what Dorothy Lane would have done, crossing over, either going under or over, 741, and obviously going over 75, and then kind of connecting out there by, I think it actually would have connected off of Union Road out there, but and then kind of going through Route 4 on the top edge of Germantown and stuff like that. And now what is considered Jefferson Township, and then kind of just you know transitioning Union Road and going back up through Brookville and all that type of stuff. But I see all these different renderings and projects and stuff that never was finished out and stuff like that. But yeah, that would have been a very different, Dayton area if those two projects were actually, finished out and everything. So, you know, don't know if that would have been a good what if or, kind of glad it never happened. But I would have honestly, it would have been kind of interesting if they would have continued, Dorothy Lane over to Union Road over there, and then basically made like a kind of like a parkway is what I think it's what it kind of looked like. But that would have definitely changed how the south end of or it wasn't even the south end, but like Moraine would have been set up, and probably would have never got the trash mound out there off of Gettysburg with waste management and all that type of stuff. But you know, yeah, share your thoughts on that. What's your you know, maybe if you were back in the living in those areas or were around still in the late 60s and 70s, you know, or even if you're a teenager, like I said, back in the 70s, you know, some of the, you know, some of these things that would have happened if it ever did, you know, maybe you're around in the teenager in the 70s when they were doing the, you know, 675 loop down here on the southeast corner. But if you like this video, share your comments, you know, give me your thoughts, and you know, I'll appreciate a good like and subscribe. Beyond that, have yourself a good day.